He walked into the conference room wearing my work like it was his second skin. I just smiled. He didn't know I'd already swapped the heart of that presentation. 3 weeks of financial modeling, countless late nights refining forecasts worth $4.8 million. And here he was, clutching my stolen files with the confidence of a man who'd never bothered to check the formulas. The executive team from Vistral Enterprises sat waiting, pens poised. I settled into my chair at the far end of the table, watching him adjust his tie. Let him have his moment. The numbers would speak for themselves soon enough. My name is Madeline Carter, and I've spent the last 6 years building financial models in the shadows of Argento Solutions' glass towers here in Denver. 34 years old, single, and dedicated to the kind of meticulous work that makes companies millions but rarely makes headlines. I'm the one who catches the decimal points that could tank a merger. The one who stays until midnight, perfecting forecasts that executives present as their own brilliance. Ryan Blake joined our strategic consulting team 18 months ago. All sharp suits and sharper smiles. Harvard MBA. He'd mention within 5 minutes of any conversation. The kind of man who learned early that confidence could substitute for competence if you packaged it right. Tall, conventionally handsome, with that practiced laugh that made senior partners feel clever. He had a gift for being in the right place when credit was being distributed, absent when actual work needed doing. I'd watched him do it to others. Sarah's competitive analysis that suddenly became Ryan's market insights. Tom's risk assessment framework that Ryan refined by changing the font. Each time, the original creator would complain quietly in the break room. Then, let it go. Not worth the drama, they'd say. He'll slip up eventually. But when you're a woman in finance, especially one who prefers data to drinks with the partners, you learn that eventually never comes unless you make it happen. The Vistral Enterprises project landed on my desk 3 weeks ago. A potential $4.8 million consulting contract, contingent on demonstrating we could forecast their expansion into renewable energy markets with precision. The kind of project that could secure promotions, bonuses, maybe even partnership track. I dove in, building models that accounted for everything from lithium price fluctuations to federal tax credit changes. It was during my second week that I discovered something crucial, a risk pattern in raw material costs that everyone else had missed. The standard forecasting models weren't capturing the volatility correctly. I spent 4 straight days rebuilding everything from scratch, creating new formulas that painted a dramatically different picture of Vistral's potential returns. Ryan appeared at my desk last Tuesday, coffee in hand, smile at full wattage. Hey, Madeline. Heard you're killing it on the Vistral project. Mind if I take a look? Always trying to learn from the best. I should have known then. The compliment was too smooth, the interest too sudden. But I was tired, proud of my work, maybe even a little flattered. I showed him the overview, keeping my laptop screen tilted away from the detailed formulas. Fascinating approach, he said, eyes scanning every visible number. We should collaborate on the presentation. I've got it handled, I told him. He left. But something felt off. That night, working late again, I checked our shared drive access logs. There it was, Ryan Blake, accessing my project folder at 11:47 p.m., downloading files. My files. But here's what Ryan didn't know. I maintained 2 versions of everything. The shared drive held my work in progress, the one with the original, flawed formulas. The real model, the corrected one, lived on my personal drive. I stared at that access log, feeling the familiar burn of rage start to rise. Then, slowly, it transformed into something else. Something colder, more patient. Let him take it, I thought. Let him take it all. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, my mind crystal clear about what needed to happen. The Vistral project wasn't just another financial model, it was the most complex forecast I'd ever built. 3 weeks of 18-hour days had gone into creating a comprehensive analysis of their renewable energy expansion, accounting for variables most analysts wouldn't even think to include. The core challenge was modeling the volatility in rare earth mineral prices, essential components for solar panels and wind turbines. The standard approach used simple moving averages, but I discovered that wouldn't work for Vistral. Their supply chain was uniquely exposed to Chinese export policies and African mining disruptions. Miss that correlation, and you'd overestimate profits by millions. I'd built two models initially. The first used conventional formulas, clean, professional, and catastrophically wrong. It showed steady 22% returns, the kind of numbers executives love to see. The second model, my real work, incorporated stochastic volatility modeling and Monte Carlo simulations. It painted a more complex picture. 14% returns with specific hedging strategies, or potential losses of $1.2 million if they proceeded without risk mitigation. Ryan had stolen the first model. I watched him over the next few days, noting how he suddenly volunteered for the Vistral presentation team, how he mentioned running some numbers in the staff meeting, how he caught our director, Patricia Chen, after the Thursday briefing to discuss his insights on the renewable sector. He even had the audacity to ask me for input on the presentation flow, as if I were merely a supporting player in my own work. Just want to make sure we're aligned, he said, leaning against my cubicle wall with practiced casualness. I've been deep in the numbers, and I think I've found some interesting angles. I'm sure you have, I replied, fingers never pausing on my keyboard. What Ryan didn't understand about financial modeling is that it's like building a house of cards. Pull one assumption, change one formula, and the entire structure reveals itself as either solid or catastrophically fragile. The model he'd stolen had a critical flaw in cells K47 through K195, the risk-adjusted return calculations. Instead of using XIRR for irregular cash flows, I'd accidentally left in a basic IRR formula. Fine for a first draft, devastating for a final presentation. The error compounded through every subsequent calculation. By the time it reached the summary slides, that 22% return was pure fiction, built on mathematical sand. I spent the rest of that week perfecting the real model, the one I'd submit through proper channels to our finance director, Lydia Nolan, every assumption documented, every formula triple-checked, every scenario tested. I created backups, generated audit trails, and most importantly, time-stamped everything. The metadata would show weeks of development, hundreds of saved versions, a clear chain of custody from my laptop to the final product. Meanwhile, Ryan was busy playing politics. He scheduled a prep session with the junior analysts, walking them through his findings with the confidence of someone who believed copying was the same as creating. He sent emails about finalizing the deck and polishing the message. He even suggested we move the presentation up a week to strike while the iron's hot. I agreed to everything. Yes, let's move it up. Yes, you should definitely take the lead. Yes, I'll sit in the back and take notes. The night before the presentation, I submitted my final report to Lydia through our secure documentation system, the one executives used for board materials, the one that logged every axis and modification. My cover memo was brief. Final Vistral forecasting model and analysis. Please note significant discrepancies with any circulating preliminary versions. Then I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and reviewed my wardrobe for the next day. Nothing flashy. Let Ryan have the spotlight. He'd dressed for the part all week. New tie, fresh haircut, the works. I'd wear my usual navy suit, the one that made me invisible in a room full of men who thought they were the smartest ones present. I thought about warning him. For about 30 seconds, I genuinely considered pulling him aside, explaining the error, giving him a chance to fix it. Then I remembered Sarah's haunted expression when her analysis won Ryan a commendation. Tom's bitter laugh when Ryan's refinements got him invited to the partner retreat. No, Ryan had made his choice the moment he logged into that shared drive at 11:47 p.m. Now he would live with the consequences. Or rather, present them to a room full of executives with millions on the line. Tomorrow would be educational for everyone involved. That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, from anticipation. I'd played this scenario through my mind a dozen times, each iteration ending with Ryan's carefully constructed facade crumbling in front of the people he'd tried so hard to impress. But I needed to be strategic about the aftermath. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about ensuring Ryan could never do this again to anyone. I arrived at the office at 6 a.m., 2 hours before the presentation. The building was nearly empty, just security guards and a few investment banking analysts who'd never left from the night before. I made my way to the 12th floor, where the main conference room overlooked downtown Denver, the mountains visible in the distance through floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything needed to be perfect. I connected my laptop to the backup presentation system, ensuring my corrected model was ready if needed. Then I composed one final email, scheduled to send at 9:15 a.m., 15 minutes into Ryan's presentation. The recipients: Lydia Nolan, Patricia Chen, our managing director James Morrison, and importantly, the head of HR. The subject line: Documentation of Intellectual Property Concerns. Attached were screenshots of the system logs showing Ryan's unauthorized access, my development timeline, and a detailed comparison between his stolen version and my corrected model. But the real masterstroke was simpler. I'd sent a courtesy copy of the correct forecast to Mark Steinberg, Vistral's CFO, the previous evening. Just a professional note. Looking forward to tomorrow's discussion. Attached, please find the validated model for your reference. He'd likely review it over his morning coffee, right before walking into our presentation. By 8:30, the conference room was filling up. The Vistral team arrived in force. 6 executives, including Steinberg, their CEO Diana Walsh, and their head of strategic planning. From our side, the entire leadership team assembled. Morrison in his $1,000 suit, Patricia Chen looking sharp and expectant, Lydia Nolan with her characteristic poker face, and a handful of senior managers. Ryan was already there, of course. He'd commandeered the spot by the projection screen, laser pointer in hand, wearing a new charcoal suit that probably cost him half a month's salary. He was chatting with Morrison, gesturing confidently at the screen where the first slide proclaimed Vistral Enterprises Renewable Energy Financial Forecast, with his name prominently displayed as lead analyst. My name appeared nowhere. I took a seat at the far end of the table, opening my laptop quietly. A few colleagues nodded at me. They knew I'd been working on Vistral. Sarah caught my eye and raised an eyebrow. I gave her the slightest smile. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan began at exactly 9 a.m., his voice carrying that practiced authority he'd perfected in front of his bathroom mirror. Thank you for joining us today. What I'm about to show you represents weeks of intensive analysis and a completely fresh approach to renewable energy forecasting. I watched Steinberg pull out his phone, probably checking emails. His expression shifted slightly. There it was. He'd seen my attachment. Ryan clicked to the next slide, a beautiful visualization of projected returns. As you can see, our models indicate a robust 22% ROI for Vistral's expansion into solar and wind markets. This factors in current commodity prices, federal incentives, and market demand projections through 2030. Excuse me, Steinberg interrupted, his voice cutting through Ryan's flow. Can you walk us through your assumptions on rare earth mineral volatility, specifically, how you're accounting for supply chain disruptions in your risk model? Ryan's smile flickered. Of course, if you'll turn to slide 7. Actually, Steinberg continued, I'm looking at some numbers here that suggest a significantly different picture. Ms. Nolan, were you aware there might be multiple versions of this analysis in circulation? Lydia's poker face never changed, but her eyes found mine. I received a final validated model last night through our secure system. Perhaps we should compare versions to ensure everyone's working from the same data. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Morrison looked between Ryan and Lydia, his expression darkening. Multiple versions? Ryan, I thought you said this was the definitive analysis. It is, Ryan insisted, but sweat was beading on his forehead. I've been working on this for weeks. Really? Patricia Chen interjected. Because I could have sworn this was Madeline's project. Madeline, weren't you assigned as lead analyst for Vistral 3 weeks ago? Every head in the room turned to me. I closed my laptop slowly, standing up with deliberate calm. Yes, I was. And yes, I did develop a comprehensive forecast model. However, there appears to be an earlier draft in circulation, one with a significant error in the risk-adjusted return calculations. Specifically, cells K47 through K195 use the wrong formula for irregular cash flows, which compounds through the entire model. I walked to the front of the room, each step measured. Ryan stood frozen by the screen, his face cycling through emotions, confusion, fear, rage, and back to fear. May I asked, gesturing to the presentation controls. Morrison nodded grimly. Please. As I reached for the laptop, my scheduled email would be landing in inboxes across the room. The soft buzz of phones receiving messages provided a subtle soundtrack to Ryan's unraveling catastrophe. The trap was sprung. Now for the reveal. I connected my laptop with practiced efficiency, my fingers steady despite the electricity in the room. The Vistral executives leaned forward as my screen appeared on the projection system, not the sleek, minimalist slides Ryan had prepared, but a dense Excel workbook showing the real numbers in all their complex glory. Mr. Steinberg asked about rare earth mineral volatility, I began, pulling up the corrected model. The version you've been seeing assumes a simple 3% annual fluctuation based on historical averages. However, Vistral's specific supply chain runs through 3 critical choke points: the Jiangxi Province processing facilities, the Mount Weld operations in Australia, and the Mountain Pass mine in California. I clicked through to my risk analysis tab. When you model the actual geopolitical risks and supply constraints, the volatility jumps to 18 and 23%. This completely changes the return profile. That's not possible, Ryan stammered. The model I've been working with. The model you accessed from the shared drive at 11:47 p.m. last Tuesday? I asked calmly. Yes, that was my preliminary draft. I'm curious how you've been working with it, considering the file logs show no modifications after your initial download. The room went silent. Morrison's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. Patricia Chen was scrolling through her phone, reading my email, no doubt. Diana Walsh, Vistral's CEO, spoke for the first time. Ms. Carter, what exactly are we looking at here? Are you saying the numbers we've been presented are off by approximately $1.2 million in potential losses if you proceed with the expansion as currently planned, I said, pulling up my Monte Carlo simulation. The flawed model doesn't account for the correlation between Chinese export restrictions and price spikes. When you factor that in, along with the real cost of hedging strategies, your best-case scenario drops to 14% returns, with a 30% probability of negative returns in the first 2 years. This is ridiculous, Ryan burst out, his composure finally cracking. I did the work. I ran these numbers myself. Really? Lydia Nolan's voice was ice. Then perhaps you can explain why the formulas in your presentation match. Character for character. The errors in Madeline's preliminary draft, including a typo in cell M142, where volatility is spelled volatility. I pulled up the comparison I'd prepared, showing Ryan's slides next to my draft versions. The evidence was undeniable, not just the numbers, but formatting quirks, color choices, even my personal notation system that no one else in the company used. Furthermore, I continued. If you actually understood the model, you'd have caught the fundamental error. The IRR formula in the original doesn't work for irregular cash flows. Vistral's payment schedule isn't monthly or quarterly, it's tied to project milestones. Using the wrong formula makes it look like money appears faster than it actually will. Steinberg was furiously taking notes. So the real return is 14%, not 22%. With proper hedging strategies, yes. Without them, you're looking at potential significant losses. The correct model includes 3 different hedging scenarios, currency exposure analysis, and a comprehensive risk matrix that took 2 weeks to build. 2 weeks that Ryan apparently spent preparing his wardrobe. Sarah muttered from the back. loud enough for everyone to hear. Morrison stood up slowly. Ryan, I think you should sit down. Madeline, please continue with the correct presentation. But Ryan wasn't done. Desperation made him reckless. This is a setup. She's trying to sabotage me because she's jealous. Everyone knows Madeline can't handle competition. Competition? I laughed. Actually laughed. Ryan, you don't compete with someone by stealing their homework. You compete by doing better work. And for the record, I'm not jealous. I'm just tired of watching you take credit for other people's efforts. I clicked to a new slide I'd prepared specifically for this moment. Speaking of which, I've documented similar incidents involving Sarah Martinez's competitive analysis from January and Tom Bradley's risk framework from last fall. Same pattern, files accessed after hours, presented as your own work. Original creators sidelined. The HR director, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Ms. Carter, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support? Check your email, I said simply. Sent at 9:15 with full documentation. Phones buzzed around the table as the leadership team discovered my carefully compiled evidence file. Screenshots, access logs, email trails, and testimonials from colleagues who'd been too intimidated to speak up before. Ryan's face had gone from red to white. He looked around the room for support, finding only cold stares and disappointed expressions. Morrison wouldn't even meet his eyes. I believe, Diana Walsh said slowly, that we need to see the correct analysis. Ms. Carter, would you be so kind as to walk us through your actual findings? And perhaps, she glanced at Morrison, Argento Solutions might want to reconsider who leads this engagement going forward. I nodded, pulling up my real presentation. Of course, let me show you what Vistral's renewable energy expansion actually looks like when you model it correctly. As I began presenting the work I'd poured my soul into for 3 weeks, Ryan slumped in his chair, his stolen spotlight revealing him for exactly what he was, a fraud in an expensive suit, exposed by his own greed. The numbers never lie. They just wait for the right moment to tell the truth. My presentation flowed with the precision of someone who'd lived and breathed these numbers for 3 weeks. Unlike Ryan's flashy slides, mine told a story grounded in reality, complex, sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately more valuable because it was true. Let's start with the fundamental issue, I said, pulling up a heat map of global rare earth mineral deposits. Vistral's current supply chain assumptions are based on 2019 data. Since then, we've seen export restrictions from China increase by 40%. Australia's production face environmental challenges. And new players in Africa emerge with unstable regulatory frameworks. Steinberg leaned forward. Our procurement team assured us supply wouldn't be an issue. It won't be if you implement the hedging strategies outlined in Section 3. I clicked through to a detailed breakdown. The key is diversifying suppliers before you scale production. The model shows that securing contracts with at least 3 suppliers across different continents reduces your risk exposure from 23% to 8%. For the next 40 minutes, I walked them through every aspect of the analysis. The real work wasn't just in the numbers. It was in understanding Vistral's business model deeply enough to anticipate problems they hadn't even considered. I showed them how federal tax incentives would phase out over their expansion timeline, how currency fluctuations between their European customers and Asian suppliers could squeeze margins, how seasonal energy demand patterns would affect cash flow. Diana Walsh interrupted occasionally with sharp questions, each one probing deeper into the analysis. Unlike Ryan, who would have fumbled or deflected, I had answers backed by data. Every assumption was documented. Every calculation transparent. This volatility in Q3 of year 2, she pointed to a sharp dip in the projections. Walk me through that. That's when your largest competitor's German facility comes online, I explained, pulling up supplementary market analysis. They've already secured preliminary contracts with 2 of your target customers. The model assumes you'll need to drop prices by 7% to remain competitive during that period. You modeled our competitor's expansion. Walsh looked impressed. Financial forecasting isn't just about internal numbers, I said. It's about understanding the entire ecosystem your client operates in. Throughout my presentation, Ryan sat silent, shrinking into his chair. The other executives had stopped acknowledging his existence entirely. Patricia Chen was taking detailed notes, occasionally nodding. Lydia Nolan's expression had shifted from neutral to something that might have been approval. When I reached the final slides, the ones showing realistic but still profitable growth scenarios, Morrison finally spoke. "This is exceptional work, Madeline. The depth of analysis, the risk mitigation strategies. This is exactly what Vistral needs to see." "I have a question," Steinberg said, looking directly at Morrison. "How did Mr. Blake's version make it this far? Didn't anyone review these numbers before this presentation?" The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes. Morrison cleared his throat. "That's something we'll be investigating internally, I can assure you." "Actually," Lydia Nolan interrupted, "I think transparency is warranted here. I received Madeline's final model last night and immediately recognized discrepancies with what was being prepared for today's presentation. I've already initiated an internal audit of our project assignment and review processes." She turned to me. Madeline followed proper protocols by submitting her work through official channels. The question is why parallel, incorrect versions were allowed to proceed. "Because he's been doing this for months." Tom Bradley spoke up from the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at him. "My risk framework, Sarah's competitive analysis. We all knew but figured it wasn't worth the fight. Madeline's the first one with the guts to document it properly." Sarah nodded. "I have emails where Ryan asked to review my work, then presented it to the Singapore office as his own. I can forward them to HR if needed." The floodgates opened. Other team members began sharing similar experiences. The pattern was clear. Ryan had built his reputation on stolen work, counting on people's reluctance to cause drama in the workplace. Diana Walsh held up a hand. "I think we've heard enough. Mr. Morrison, Ms. Nolan. I trust Argento Solutions will handle this matter appropriately. As for Vistral, we're interested in moving forward, but only with Ms. Carter leading the engagement. This level of analytical rigor is exactly what we need." "Absolutely," Morrison agreed quickly. "Madeline will be your primary point of contact going forward." "This is insane," Ryan finally exploded, standing up so abruptly his chair rolled backward. "You're going to destroy my career over a misunderstanding? I was trying to help. I was adding value." "What value?" I asked quietly. "What single insight did you add to those slides? What formula did you improve? What risk did you identify that I hadn't already modeled?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say because he'd never understood the work well enough to contribute to it. "I think we're done here," Morrison said. "Ryan, please see me in my office, now. The rest of you. Let's give Madeline and the Vistral team room to continue their discussion." As people filed out, each Vistral executive shook my hand. Walsh lingered, studying me with calculating eyes. "You knew this would happen, didn't you? You let him hang himself." I met her gaze steadily. "I gave him every opportunity to do the right thing. He chose differently." "Remind me never to underestimate you," she said with a slight smile. "I look forward to working with someone who plays the long game so effectively." The conference room door closed behind them, leaving me alone with my laptop and the vindication of 3 weeks of patient planning. Justice, served cold with a side of Excel formulas. The aftermath moved swiftly. Within an hour of the meeting's end, an email from HR requested all staff submit any documentation of intellectual property concerns by end of business. By lunch, Ryan's desk was being cleaned out by security while he sat in Morrison's office, the blinds drawn but his animated gestures visible through the glass. I spent the rest of the morning in back-to-back meetings with the Vistral team, diving deeper into implementation strategies. Diana Walsh had assembled her entire strategic planning committee, and they peppered me with questions that would have destroyed Ryan's shallow understanding. But for me, each query was an opportunity to showcase the thoroughness of my work. This sensitivity analysis on lithium prices. Their head of operations pointed to a complex grid. You've modeled 7 different scenarios. How did you determine these specific price points? Historical correlation with Chinese industrial output, cross-referenced with mine production reports from the past decade. I explained, pulling up supporting data. But the key insight is this. I highlighted a pattern in the numbers. Lithium prices don't move independently. They're tied to copper and cobalt markets with a 3-4 month lag. If you monitor those indicators, you get an early warning system for price shifts. The Vistral team exchanged glances. This was the kind of insight that saved millions. The difference between real analysis and surface-level number crunching. By 2 p.m., the internal audit had expanded. Lydia Nolan personally interviewed everyone who'd worked with Ryan over the past 18 months. The stories that emerged painted a picture of systematic intellectual property theft. He'd been smart about it, never taking credit for entire projects. Just key insights and innovations that made him look like a strategic thinker. Sarah stopped by my desk mid-afternoon, eyes bright with something between admiration and amusement. You know the best part? He tried to throw you under the bus in Morrison's office, said you'd set him up, that you deliberately gave him bad data. And? Morrison asked him to explain the error in the formula. Just explain what was wrong with it. She grinned. He didn't even understand what XERR meant. Started babbling about how details weren't his strong suit. He was more of a big-picture guy. Tom Bradley joined us, looking more animated than I'd seen him in months. Legal's involved now. Turns out presenting falsified financial data to clients violates about 6 different company policies. And possibly some SEC regulations if the numbers had been used for investment decisions. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. I'd known the stolen model was flawed, but I hadn't fully considered the legal implications of Ryan presenting incorrect financial data as fact. He'd walked into a trap that was even more comprehensive than I'd planned. Patricia Chen appeared at 3:30, her expression unreadable. Madeline, do you have a moment? We walked to her office, passing the cubicle that had been Ryan's, already empty, his nameplate removed, his expensive coffee maker gone. It was as if he'd never existed. Sit, Patricia said, closing the door. I owe you an apology. I should have seen this pattern earlier. As leadership, we failed you and the others who were affected. I don't need an apology, I said carefully. I need systemic change. Ryan was able to do this because our culture rewards presentation over substance, confidence over competence. She nodded slowly. You're right. Lydia and I have already discussed implementing new protocols, mandatory documentation of authorship, restricted access to project files, and regular audits of work attribution. She paused. We're also recommending you for promotion to senior financial analyst, effective immediately. The Vistral project alone justifies it. But your handling of this situation shows leadership qualities we need. Thank you, I said, though the promotion felt almost anticlimactic after the morning's events. There's more, Patricia continued. Diana Walsh called Morrison directly. Vistral wants to expand the engagement beyond the initial scope. They're talking about a 2-year advisory contract. With you as the dedicated lead, it would mean managing a team, international travel, direct presentation to their board. Now that got my attention. This wasn't just vindication, it was transformation. The kind of opportunity that changed careers. Ryan's been terminated, effective immediately. Patricia added, HR is conducting exit procedures now. There may be legal follow-up depending on what the full audit reveals. I thought about Ryan clearing out his desk, his carefully constructed image in ruins. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for orchestrating his downfall so methodically. But then I remembered Sarah's defeated expression after he'd stolen her work. Tom's bitter resignation. All the others who'd been stepped on by someone who confused ambition with ability. Good, I said simply. Patricia studied me. You knew exactly how this would play out, didn't you? From the moment you discovered he'd accessed your files, I knew he'd present the work as his own. I knew he wouldn't understand it well enough to catch the errors. And I knew that when confronted with real expertise, his facade would crumble. I met her gaze. What I didn't know was how deep the pattern went. That was a bonus. Remind me to never get on your bad side, she said with a wry smile. Now, let's talk about your new team structure for the Vistral engagement. As we discussed staffing and resources, I felt the shape of my career shifting, expanding. Ryan had thought he was stealing a presentation. Instead, he'd stolen his own future and handed me mine. The 14th floor of Argento Solutions was a different world. Marble floors instead of industrial carpet, original artwork on the walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel like you owned the city spread below. My new office, not a cubicle, not a shared space, but an actual office with a door that closed, faced west toward the Rocky Mountains. I stood at those windows on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after Ryan's spectacular implosion, watching the sun paint the peaks gold. The nameplate on my door read, Madeline Carter, Senior Financial Analyst, Strategic Initiatives. Next to my desk sat boxes of files for the expanded Vistral engagement, now a $12 million contract over 2 years. My team of 6 analysts was working late in the conference room next door, building out the implementation framework for Vistral's European expansion. I'd handpicked each of them, including Sarah and Tom, who'd finally gotten the recognition they deserved. We worked like a real team, sharing credit, building on each other's ideas, creating something stronger than any individual contribution. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Lydia Nolan entered, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of exceptional scotch. Thought you might appreciate this, she said, pouring generous measures. The Denver Post got wind of Ryan's termination. They're running a story on corporate intellectual property theft, though we've kept your name out of it. What's he doing now? I asked, curious despite myself. Last I heard, interviewing with a startup in Austin. Apparently, his references aren't quite what he expected them to be. She raised her glass. To justice served at exactly the right temperature. We clinked glasses. The scotch burned pleasantly, tasting of smoke and satisfaction. You know what the ironic part is? I said, turning back to the window. If he'd just done the work, really learned the skills instead of stealing them, he could have had all this legitimately. He wasn't stupid, just lazy. Lazy and entitled. The most dangerous combination, Lydia agreed, though I suspect he's learning that lesson now. My phone buzzed with a message from Diana Walsh. Brilliant work on the European tax optimization strategy. The board is impressed. Let's discuss expanding your role at our Geneva meeting next month. Geneva. Board meetings, strategic partnerships. This was the career I'd built in the shadows while Ryan was perfecting his tie collection. I thought about that morning 3 weeks ago, watching him walk into the conference room wearing my work-like armor he'd never earned. The memory no longer burned. It glowed with the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. I should thank him, I mused, swirling the scotch in my glass. If he hadn't tried to steal my work, I might have spent another 5 years being overlooked. His greed forced me to stand up and claim what was mine. Don't give him too much credit, Lydia said dryly. You would have risen regardless. This just accelerated the timeline. She left me alone with my view and my thoughts. The sun was setting now, painting Denver in shades of amber and shadow. Somewhere in this city, Ryan was probably updating his resume, scrubbing his LinkedIn, trying to rebuild a reputation that had taken 18 months to build and 1 morning to destroy. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my emails. Dozens of messages from colleagues at other firms who'd heard about the Vistral win. Interview requests from industry publications wanting to profile the analysis. A speaking invitation for a financial modeling conference in New York. But the message that made me smile was from a junior analyst at our Chicago office. Ms. Carter, I heard about what happened. I've been dealing with something similar. A colleague who keeps borrowing my ideas. Your story gave me the courage to document everything. Thank you for showing us it's possible to fight back smart. That was the real victory. Not just exposing Ryan, but creating a precedent. making it clear that intellectual property theft wouldn't be tolerated, that the quiet workers in the shadows had power too, if they were willing to use it strategically. I raised my glass to the window, to the city, to everyone who'd ever had their work stolen by someone with more confidence than competence. He wanted to steal my spotlight. I said aloud to the empty office, repeating the words I'd thought that morning as I watched him present my errors as his expertise. Instead, I gave him the stage, just not the script. The scotch was empty, the sun was gone, and my team was waiting for me to review their work. I gathered my files, turned off the lights, and headed to the conference room. There was real work to do, the kind that built careers and companies and futures. Ryan had taught me one valuable lesson. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just success. It's letting your enemies fail so spectacularly that they become a cautionary tale, whispered about in break rooms and happy hours for years to come. And I became the opposite story. The one about the analyst who fought back with Excel formulas and timestamp evidence, who turned theft into triumph, who proved that in the end, the numbers never lie. They just wait for the right moment to tell the truth. Thank you for listening to this story. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts on Madeline's revenge. Have you ever dealt with a credit-stealing colleague? How did you handle it?